Okay, so one of the reasons we care about energy is the economics and the externalities of our energy use. And so anybody who's taken an econ class, social costs are private costs plus externalities. And so one of the challenges we see in a lot of our energy systems, and I would say in particular to things like oil, which is such a key piece to a lot of economies around the world, and is the only major fuel for transportation. So there isn't a diversity of options. We see that private costs don't reflect the social costs. So in other words, society is having to bear the externalities of those fuels. Externalities can come in a lot of different forms. Climate change itself is an externality. Air pollution, water pollution, land use, those kind of things are externalities. Fighting over resources, that's an externality for using these resources. And oil in particular often is very poorly priced to capture those externalities. And often, we see this even in the United States, and often it is such an important resource for like low-income communities in order to have access to jobs or economic. It tends to already be a pretty big piece of their energy budget, that it is hard to internalize some of those externalities. So there are externalities that are going to be borne by society or borne by taxpayers or borne by people at large. With carbon emissions and things like that, because that's not reflected in the private cost. So it is challenging. There are places that even subsidize some of these resources because of access for people and the impact of those costs. And so this is one of the challenges we see with some of our energy resources is we're actually encouraging the use of them by not pricing in some of those externalities. All right, geopolitics also comes into this. So this is just one example. I think there could be a lot of different examples on where energy and geopolitics really come into play. I think this one is pretty present on the world stage right now. A lot of conversations going on. But, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it just highlighted again, I would say, this isn't the first time this was highlighted, Europe's vulnerability in terms of natural gas supply and getting that from Russia. And so Europe has really has really tried hard to reduce its dependence and has reduced its dependence on Russian supply. So this is where geopolitics between countries can really come into play when we're talking about what energy resources are different countries relying on for those services. And so again, that's an externality that isn't priced into it. Europe was using Russian gas because it was cheap, but it was cheap on a private cost, not necessarily cheap when you consider all of the other ramifications of using that natural gas. All right, so those are a couple of the reasons we care. Another reason we care is about equity. Global energy consumption is highly inequitable. So what I'm showing you here is just that primary energy consumption. Again, this is commercial energy consumption, so it doesn't include traditional biomass. The layers are by country. I haven't labeled them all, but I've kind of given you the sections. You can see the United States has used quite a bit of the world's commercial energy for a long time. China has seen a huge growth in the last couple of decades in terms of energy consumption. Russia has long been one of the big energy users in the world. And then you can see places like Africa, which has a much lower commercial energy consumption compared to their population, compared to places like United States, even and China. So this is relevant because modern energy access is definitely correlated to quality of life. And we can look at that by looking at the electricity consumption per capita. Maybe you've seen a chart like this. This is using the Human Development Index, which is just a measure of longevity, knowledge, and quality of or standard of living. And you can see that how important or how impactful access to a modern energy currency like electricity, which can provide a lot of a lot of energy services, especially if you have reliable electricity, how important that can be for moving up the Human Development Index on the low end. On the high end, you see very little change with human development based on more electricity production. So here I am in the United States here. You can see China kind of in here in terms of the Human Development Index. And then some of these other countries on the lower end is where access to more reliable electricity consumption could help move up the HDI. So that in equity does matter in terms of human welfare and development.